Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Urban Design Commission meeting for Wednesday, April 13th, 2011. Can we have the roll call, please?
Douglas Gasek.
Here.
James Doherty.
Here.
Jim Sawhill.
Here.
Andrew Garsha.
Here.
Jeff Dinwiddie.
Here.
Thomas Tiber.
Here.
I'm going to take one item a little out of order tonight before we get to our regular agenda and the minutes. We've had a request to set one of the site plan reviews for a public hearing. That would be case 2011-36, the South Anchorage Baseball Boosters and South Anchorage Football. Mr. Garsha, can I have a motion, please? Or Mr. Gasek, sorry.
Yeah. I'll move to postpone case number 2011-36 and set it for public hearing.
And could we set that for May 11th?
Yes, for May 11th.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can I have a second, please? Seconded by Mr. Doherty. And is there any objection to the motion? Excuse me? Yeah, I guess one thing we would like to poll, will people be available on May 11th?
Yes. Well,
Yeah. Everyone's planning on attending, and we're hoping to have one more member by then. Keeping our fingers crossed. All right, sounds good.
Is that what who did you get the request for to set aside from?
We've got it through the community council.
Okay.
Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, that is approved. Now go back to the regular agenda. The first is the minutes. May I have a motion, please? It's moved by Mr. Doherty, seconded by Mr. Tybor. Is there any changes or additions, amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, is there any objections to the minutes? Seeing none, that's approved unanimously. We do not have any special order of business or executive discussions. I would like to get to disclosures. Do any members have disclosures on any of the case tonight? Mr. Tybor?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I need to disclose that my wife works for Dell HKM as a drafter. I did note that they were the representative of the petitioner for an item on the regular agenda, case number 2011034, and I wanted to disclose my relationship.
Okay. Do you feel you have a financial interest that would prevent you from participating in this case, then?
Because my wife receives a salary, I believe there's a financial interest.
Okay. I would like to entertain a motion to direct Mr. Tybor to participate in that case. It's a motion by Mr. Dinwiddie, seconded by Mr. Gasek. Mr. Dinwiddie, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that Mr. Tiber has shown a track record so far on his time as a board to be impartial, even regardless of if I think he can be impartial in this case, and like to participate in this case. That he does not have a conflict of interest.
You believe he does not have a conflict of interest and he should be directed to participate?
That's correct.
Any other discussion from the board? Yeah.
Mr. Tybor, I did push 3 buttons. Mr. Tybor, does your wife have an ownership share in Dell HKM?
She does not.
Okay. All I wanted to know.
Okay, is there any other discussion? Is there any objection to directing Mr. Tybor to participate in this case? Seeing none, you are directed to participate. Any other disclosures?
Through the chair, case number, or on the consent agenda, resolution 2009-0118, Valley of the Moon Park improvements. I believe we are a contractor and we installed those improvements, so we do have a direct impact. And so that case on the, but I think that was before my time. The original plan for that was already approved, and this is just a consent agenda thing, but we actually have worked on the Valley of the Moon Park during the 2010 season as a contractor for the city.
So, I'm trying to think the best way to handle that one. I think first of all, we'll need a motion to direct Mr. Dinwiddie to participate in that consent agenda item for Valley of the Moon Park. That's a motion by Mr. Gasek and second by Mr. Garza. Mr. Gasek, can you speak to the motion, please?
Yeah, I'll move to direct Commissioner Dinwiddie to participate in the case. I think he's shown that he does have a conflict, so I'll be voting no on the issue.
Thank you. Mr. Garza, you have anything else to add?
As this is a consent item and we're not actually reviewing and commenting on the case, I don't believe at this point Mr. Dinwiddie has a conflict of interest because we're not necessarily reviewing the case and there won't be any comments made from the board that could be in his financial interest at this point.
Okay, if I could speak to the motion, I don't plan to support the motion either. I don't think he should participate in a project that he's working directly on and has a financial interest in. So with that, I think we have disagreements. We'll go ahead and use the machines. That motion fails. You're directed not to participate in that. We'll need, when we go to the consent agenda, to pull that item so we can approve the rest of the consent agenda and then vote on that item without Mr. Dinwiddie's participation. Any other disclosures?
I have a disclosure.
Mr. Gasek.
In regards to case 2011 and 37, I own a duplex that's right in that area. I don't necessarily think this would financially benefit me, but I just want to disclose that I have a personal interest in the construction that happens in that area.
You drive up and down the road?
I go to visit my property at times, and yes, I drive up and down the road, but it does affect the aesthetics of my neighborhood, so just wanted to disclose that.
Do you have a direct financial interest in the outcome of this case?
I do not believe I do.
Okay, I'll take a motion to direct Mr. Gasek to participate in 2011-037.
I'm Mr. Garcia, by the way. Just
Garcia, sorry.
clarification.
Garza Gasek, you guys are killing me here. So, we have a motion by Mr. Dinwiddie, second by Mr. Doherty. Mr. Dinwiddie, can you speak to your motion, please?
I believe that Mr. Garcia has a, if we all benefit from roads in and around properties we own, and that there's no direct relationship, and they should be directed to participate.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any objections to directing Mr. Garcia to participate? Seeing none, that is approved. Any other disclosures? Okay. With that, remind us, Mr. Dinwiddie, which of the consent agenda items did you conflict out on?
Valley of the Moon Park, 2009-18.
2009-18. Can I have a motion to pull that item from the consent agenda, please? Mr. Gasek, seconded by Mr. Doherty.
I'd like to pull case number 2009-18 from the consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any other items that wish to be pulled? Nope. Any objection to pulling that item? Seeing none, that's approved. Can Can I have a motion on the consent agenda, please?
There we go.
Mr. Doherty has moved for approval of consent agenda, seconded by Mr. Garsha. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Any changes or additions to the consent agenda? Is there an objection to it being approved? Seeing none, consent agenda is approved. Can I have a motion for approval for the consent agenda item 2009-018?
I'm already moved.
To wait for the system to clear.
Or have to bear with us, our machine is slowing us down a little tonight. It's moved by Mr. Gasek, second by Mr. Tybor. Any discussion of that item? Any changes or deletions? Any objection to its approval? Seeing none, that's unanimously approved. And that's done with consent agenda items. We're on to item F, the regular agenda. Item 2, site landscape plans for approval. The first case that's up tonight is case 2011-033. Petitioner's Municipality of Anchorage, a request to amend a site plan for a public facility. It's a final site plan facility. It's a final public facility site plan amendment for the Cuddy Family Midtown Park Playground Project, Cuddy Family Park Subdivision, Tract A. Site address is 201 West 40th Avenue. Staff, we may have a presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The project goal is to create a highly accessible and inclusive playground that will serve as a regional playground for the Anchorage community. The playground is designed to meet their criteria by the organization Parks for All. Parks for All seeks to build a play environment which provides challenges to able-bodied kids but recognizes the needs of those with physical limitations. The proposed playground is identified in the master plan for Cuddy Family Midtown Park and includes 3 distinct play areas for different play types and age groups. The playground is divided into 3 areas, alpha, gamma, and beta. Each of these areas is designed for age groups 2 to 5, 5 to 12, and 2 to 12 respectively. The playground is a planned improvement to the park that was presented as part of the master plan and improved in 2006. Benches should be added to each of the 3 playground areas so that parents may monitor the activities of their children. Lighting at the playgrounds would allow play throughout the year. However, due to budget constraints, lighting could not be provided. That's all I have.
Thank you. May the petitioner representative come up? Please provide a presentation.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, my name is Terry Schoenthal. I'm with the firm of USKH, formerly Land Design North, the name that we had worked under at the time that we got this project. Tonight with me also is Josh Durand, Parks Planner, and I'll introduce him briefly. He will be helping a little with the presentation here. But the reason we're before you tonight is that as required by Title 21, we are returning with a site plan looking for approval for the parks, for the playground project, which is going into Cuddy Midtown Park. The playground project was included in the original master plan, and what we're working toward now is an implementation of that project. Right now, the intent is that site development work would proceed this coming summer with completion in 2012. It is largely community-driven. There's a lot of volunteer work associated with the project, and they're working on fundraising and gathering the necessary funds to bring the project to be able to implement it fully at this point. Right now, the overall budget for the project is roughly $500,000, give or take some. So it's a pretty substantial budget for a playground facility. As was mentioned, it is intended to be highly inclusive for kids from all over who may not all have the same abilities and face challenges with being able to use playground equipment. But one of the things that's interesting about it is that we often forget that playgrounds that aren't accessible impact parents as much as they do children. If you brought your child to a playground, as an example, and you didn't have the ability to be mobile on the surfacing, and your child fell and got hurt, you may not be in a position to be able to go and actually help a child that was in trouble on a playground. So it's an interesting mix of proponents for the project that include members of the military from both Elmendorf and Fort Richardson, parents who've come back with disabilities from Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as just a wide range of groups and families throughout our community who have children or know of people who have special needs. I would also point out that the intent of this playground is to be inclusive to all children. So while we're promoting having a really accessible playground, at the same time, we're looking to have a really exciting, challenging playground, and we'll go into that just a little deeper. Scott's right here, and he can show approximately the location within the park where that goes, just for you to get your bearings. It's right by the lake. On the upper right area there, you see the parking lot for the library, and that kind of helps get your bearings. So the playground's really not so far away from the library right here. If you were to wander over there right now, there's sort of a big boulder pile that's sort of at that part of the park, and we're looking to rework that area and include this. Scott, if you want to pull that down, we have a kind of a blow-up of it right there. Scott, sorry about that, Josh. I don't know why the playground itself is intended, the bulk of the surfacing for the playground will be resilient rubber surfacing. So it'll have a really smooth, uniform finish, but still be highly resilient for kids using the equipment. There will be, right now we're looking to use engineered wood fiber for some parts of the playground area. Largely budget driven, but we may actually look at it does meet the actual ASTM, which is the sort of guiding principles for ADA accessibility. It meets those requirements, but it's at the very lower end of the spectrum probably for real ADA accessibility. But I would counter that with the fact that the bulk of all of the surfacing for this playground is resilient surfacing. The playground itself incorporates about 5 feet of topography. The different play areas in it, there are 3 play areas identified as the gamma play area and the beta play area and the alpha play area. And these 3 play areas relate to different age groups who use the equipment and kids with different abilities. And they're all separated by topography. And we're using the topography as a means of providing access to some of the upper platforms of the equipment itself. In other words, you can use the sidewalk as an ADA ramp, in essence, to get up to a little plaza area, then that has platforms that connect across to the equipment. So in this particular playground, it is accessible even to wheelchairs to get across to some of the upper platforms of the equipment itself. With respect to the park, you've heard a couple of conditions from staff with regard to the project, and I would like to address those. In the version that you've gotten, it does not show, unfortunately, the benches. We've had another concept for how the benches would work, that they would actually be these swinging benches that parents could sit in that are adjacent to the areas, but there was a conflict with use zones. So the current plans, which are over on the right, the actual diagrammatic plan there, the construction drawings, indicate that there are now benches in all 3 areas. And I have no issue with keeping that particular condition within the staff recommendations as a result of the fact that it has been our intent to comply with that, to provide seating for parents. On the other note of lighting, The park as a whole is looking to complete pieces of the master plan as it goes along. And lighting is a piece of that overall park master plan and not necessarily a part of the playground master plan. I would also note that during the times of the year when lighting is necessary, snowfall and a number of other things sort of conspire to make it less than an accessible playground. In other words, if you needed to light the playground to have it be usable, it probably doesn't work as well for the kids who need the accessibility. We don't argue that the lighting is an important component, as it is for the rest of the park, but that it is not included as part of this project, but as part of the greater master plan of the park. And I think with that, I would open up to any questions you may have.
I guess I have one question just to clarify. You were talked about the lighting, but the condition to have lighting, if money's available, that's still okay? You're not asking that to be removed?
Well, we would. The problem is we'll barely have the money. It'll be very difficult to raise all the money to put in. If we had extra money, we would probably expand the resilient surfacing if we could, as opposed to putting it into lighting. It would be good if we could remove that, because it's a pretty difficult judgment call to say, well, if we had money available, we would put it into lighting. But right now, there are a number of things that we'd like to put the money toward, including additional play equipment if that were possible, and expansion of resilient surfacing if that were possible, versus putting the money into lighting when the park master plan actually addresses that. And Scott, or Josh, here maybe you could address that a little bit more, because he's familiar with that issue.
If you're
Josh, you need to use the
need
mic.
to come, state your name for the record and speak into the microphone, please.
Josh Duran, Parks and Rec. There currently is lighting being installed in the park now for the skate oval, and there is plans for additional lighting for all the pathways that would be associated with this area specifically, and the whole area is surrounded by pathways, so it would be receiving ambient light from that.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open up the questions from the commissioner. I'd also like to say I kind of skipped over questions of staff before the petitioner came up, so if you do have additional questions of staff, now would be a time to throw those out there too. So, any questions of the applicant? Mr. Dinwiddie?
Terry, what is I have several questions. One, what's the difference in cost differential between resilient surfacing and the softball or engineered wood fiber?
It's huge. And partly it isn't just the material itself, but it's the subgrade preparation and everything that goes with it. But it's probably 3 to 4 times more expensive to do the softball poured in place resilient surfacing than engineered wood fiber.
Where's your funding coming from?
It's from contributions. There could potentially be some state funding that'll support this. It's being budgeted for, but who knows whether it gets approved or not. So, but the vast bulk of the funding for this is being managed through volunteer effort and through contributions in the community.
Your playground equipment you said you wanted to get this started this year. Who's your manufacturer? Who did you decide to go with?
Well, we're looking through the part of this, as was pointed out, is there's a national organization that we've been working with called Boundless, and they may not actually in the end have a major role in this, but there are only a few manufacturers certified by Boundless that their equipment meets all of the basic requirements for their totally inclusive approach to playground design. And one of those is Sightlines down in Seattle. Gary Max basically is the rep on that, but that's the equipment that we're looking at using right now.
Is the concept that basically a wheelchair-bound a child could go from one end of the park through all the equipment to the other end of the park? Is that
almost within the individual areas? You have to remember there are 3 areas that are segregated. There's an alpha area and a beta area, and then the gamma area is like the big Mondo playground with with kids. But the intent is that you can go by a wheelchair to the upper platforms, actually. There are transfer areas there that'll allow you to get out of that wheelchair and onto platforms that then give you access to the slides and some other things, and so those are not things that are readily available to most kids in a normal, what we would think of as accessible playground.
How many structures like this have been built in the U.S. so far?
Quite a few, actually. The goal of Boundless is to have one in all 50 states, and I think they're at like 30-some states at this point that actually have Boundless. There's one in Issaquah, Washington, as an example, in Washington State, and I think there's another one programmed down there. But they're in a variety of places, and if you go online and just were to look up Boundless by the website, you'd see some of these facilities, and they're very nice. They're often sponsored and funded by large pharmaceutical companies and other private organizations like that we typically don't have the same access to that they have in the lower 48.
What's the total percentage of the park that this playground's going to take, of the whole overall Cuddy Park?
I couldn't say that I've calculated that, but I would put it at less than 2% probably.
I don't have any other questions.
Mr. Doherty?
Yeah, this is one of the questions for staff, actually. I was just curious, just in terms of our charge, my understanding is that there's an approved site master plan, and that approved site master plan indicated a play area, approximately in the area where this play area is being designed. In that master plan, is there anything about the requirement of lighting for the playground?
Through the chair, Mr. Doherty, no, there is no requirement for lighting for the playground. That was mentioned as part of the master plan process.
It was mentioned that lighting should be provided to use the park.
Yeah, there was plans for lighting along the pathways. Beyond that, I don't remember any more lighting beyond that.
Yeah, I guess I'm just having difficulty understanding how the petitioner is to use this item number 4. It appears to be worded that it's optional, and it appears to be conditional upon funds.
Yes, there seems to be some confusion. I called LDN and spoke to one of the designers there about lighting and whether there are any plans to do it. And they said, well, we don't have the budget to do it. But I said, if funding should become available, would lighting be possible at that point? And they said, as long as you term it, if funding becomes available, then we wouldn't have any problem with that condition. So there seems to be some confusion here. But, you know, I'm not held to it. If there are better uses for money, then lighting isn't necessary. I just thought it would extend the seasons of use. You know, I wouldn't think it'd be used in the dead of winter, but in the fall it could be used, or in springtime it could be used. So that was the thinking behind the condition.
Thank you.
Mr. Gasek?
Well, this is my common question here, I think, when it comes around to parks, so I always have to throw it out there. But I think this is a beautifully designed playground facility and a great park, and so I always have to ask the question, why is the decision made to install these temporary porta potties in a beautifully designed landscape?
I'll turn that one over to Mr. Durand.
Josh Durand, Parks and Rec. That gets into the negative aspect that gets associated with the permanent structures, you know, vagrants and people of that nature using them as shelter.
You're new here, Josh.
We've heard it. It's always a bigger issue for us, and I think it's something that continue to be an unresolved issue when it comes to our parks and what sort of facilities that we're building. I just think that this is a really great space, a really great playground, and that greatness is being diminished by these porta potties that are being thrown up as kind of an afterthought.
It actually is a great question, though, because, in fact, in meeting with the moms, we've had a number of meetings with moms of kids who have problems, and for many of those moms, one of the deciding factors of where they go with their kids is the availability of bathrooms. And the fact that even we have the porta potties in the near vicinity to this is a positive thing for many of them. In the best of all worlds, this would be a great inside facility with running water and tables that you could change kids on and the whole works. But unfortunately, in our community, we've just had a heck of a problem with facilities like that. Ninth Avenue, the Park Strip ones, and there's a whole range of them that have really turned to be problematic.
Are there any other questions of the applicant or staff? Mr. Tybor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would just like to say that I intend to support the position. It's a beautiful park, and I really believe that it's been a thoughtfully designed playground, and I was very appreciative of the intent of inclusiveness for all, the special needs children as well as well. I wanted to ask, though, there was a staff's, the division's condition 2 with regard to maintenance program for landscaping, and you didn't address that. Could you speak to that?
We don't have it's a pretty common request is that we put together a maintenance plan for these facilities, and I think that's a reasonable request. Parks has done that on a number of previous ones, and so we don't take issue with that. It's as we go toward a final plan, we're happy to submit a maintenance plan for the landscape portion of this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Garcia?
On the large overview that you're showing of the park, you're indicating it appears to be a significant change to the parking lot at the library. Is that correct? You're showing a new roundabout leading to a path over a bridge over a river that doesn't seem to exist yet. See, there's the existing, but I'm looking at the new one here, the new overview you provided, and I'm referring to this whole parking lot.
I think that goes back to an older master plan that what we were requested to provide a plan that incorporated the location of the playground into the bigger scheme park. It's not our intent to demonstrate that we're calling for huge changes to the parking lot, but those were changes that were considered in the course of this master plan for the park.
So just for my own clarification, the part that's roundabout, that's not going to exist. This new pathway to the existing library parking lot won't exist. This new bridge won't exist. And this connection of the overflow to the existing pond won't exist, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, we're just talking purely about...
We're talking only about the improvements to the playground area itself.
Okay. I was somewhat confused when I was looking
Sorry.
at the drawings, and I keep seeing this big overview that wasn't necessarily being addressed in the rest of it. So with that said, I'm going to buddy up with my Mr. Gasek over there and also comment, and I'll probably pass it off to Jim Doherty, who I know put quite an effort forth several months ago and proposed took his own time and made a whole, I don't even know what to call it. It was basically a presentation about porta potties and how they can be used in Alaska in a respectable way by Parks and Recreation. And this was submitted by the Urban Design Commission to Parks and Rec. And I'm sort of surprised that it's continually still being overlooked and not responded to or commented on. And I'm just probably sharing another board member's frustration.
Well, the porta potties are not have nothing to do with the playground itself, other than they exist in the nearby vicinity.
Yeah, but you're making changes to the park, and that's an aspect that we continually ask Park and Rec to address, and it continually seems to be overlooked.
Any other commissioners have any comments or questions? Mr. Dinwiddie.
Overall, I like the idea, I like the concept, particularly the accessibility concept. I think it's original in Anchorage. It hasn't been done yet. I do share your concern with the softball versus resilient. Wheelchairs and softball versus wheelchairs on resilient service is a whole different ball game. So that may limit the accessibility that you want. I also, I think what the fellow commissioners and this board in general is if you build it, they'll use it in this town. And so the porta potty issue for us is we keep coming back to it, and I think we all understand that your presentation is based on 3 playgrounds or 4 playgrounds, so what we see before you. But that issue increases the use and increases the activity, increases the amount of viability for this park. And you can't increase the use on a park and not address that issue. In a sense, they make things as locks and security and issues that can be dealt with transients. And I think that the message needs to go back to Parks and Rec that at some point this board's going to say no. And, the answer is going to be no unless you address the porta potty issue. You'll come to this board and we'll say, you'll get a good project like this, and it won't get passed based on the porta potty issue. And I think that message needs to be directed back to the administration. And in a sense that I think this project's too good to get held up on that issue, but at the same time, it's going to come, it's going to happen, and I think that Parks and Rec needs to take that with a grain of salt and remember.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. With that, the matter rests with the board. I would entertain a positive motion, please. Mr. Doherty, seconded by Mr. Dinwiddie. Would you speak to your motion?
Well, I move to approve case 2011-33 to amend the site plan for the Cuddy Midtown Park. Subject, I'm sorry. Trying to find my way here.
Page 34.
With conditions 1, 2, and 3, the departmental recommendations, with the conditions 1, 2, and 3, but to strike condition 4.
Thank you. And we have a second from Mr. Dinwiddie. Would you speak to your motion, please?
I support the motion to approve with the conditions 1 through 3, striking number 4. I think the project is unique to Anchorage, supports the overall concept of Parks and Rec and Title 21, and I intend to support the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Dinwiddie. Mr. Doherty, do you have any findings you'd like to make for the record?
Yeah, I find that this addition of the playground area is consistent with the original master plan and seems to be consistent across the board with good design principles that we observed when we originally passed this master plan. I was waiting for this point to sort of talk about porta potties, and many of these commissioners were not on the board when this passed, but the original plan had just porta potties without any screening, and we pushed pretty hard to create screening, realizing the constraints. And I think that they've done a good job. And I also want to make sure that we observe the sideboards. This is an amendment to a master plan. We're not really talking about design per se. We're just making sure that the development that's been brought forward is consistent with what was previously planned, and I think that it is consistent, and I do plan to support the motion.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from board members? Is there objection to the motion? Seeing none, that is approved. Our next case is 2011-34, Alaska Pacific University. It's a request for a site plan review for PLI, Public Lands and Institutions District. The area is 7 acres. The location is for a final site plan, landscape plan approval for a public facility for Alaska Pacific University, Glen Olds Hall building expansion, APU endowment, Track D, generally located south of University Drive and east of Elmore Road. Staff, may we have a presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. APU is represented by Dell HCAM, is requesting final public facility site plan and landscape plan review for this project. This is the first time the Commission has seen this project. It will also be the only time and the final time they're requesting final approval for their plans. The site is zoned PLI, as is the property surrounding it. University Lake and a hotel is to the south of the site. A medical office building is to the west. Their institutional educational use is to the north and east. APU is proposing to expand the existing Glen Olds Hall to accommodate some surveying group and other sorts of offices. This three-story building, this is a three-story building. The addition will nearly double the size of the building. The department finds that the project is consistent with the policies of Anchorage 2020 and consistent with the goals and policies of the UMed plan. The construction budget is a little over $6 million. The total landscape budget is a little over $24,000, and all of that will be devoted to plant materials. The landscaping will complement the building expansion and follow the existing landscaping theme. The department recommends approval of this final public facility site plan and landscape plan subject to conditions 1 through 6 on page 4 of the packet. These are standard conditions of approval. And the site plan, you can see the first page of the site plan on page 5 of the packet, and the landscape plan is a little bit further back. On page 58 of the packet, we also have the larger plans you can pull out. There is a late comment submittal from the applicant who they're responding to a question from staff about the fire access road, and the response is that it's maintained year-round and that it's sufficient for fire access. I don't have anything more to present. If the Commission has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Also, the petitioner's representative is here to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Doherty?
Just a quick question. We've had discussions in the past about providing some guidelines for when a case comes before us for a single review versus the traditional reviews. And I would just request from staff that we develop a checklist or something like that and go over that checklist and say this project qualifies for that expedited review, because I don't know that there's any provision in the code to bypass the second review as it is right now. So I would think that we would want to follow some guidelines when we do that. I'm assuming from your presentation that you feel that this meets some sort of criteria to allow a single review, but that criteria has never really been expressed or written down or codified or anything. So it's confusing if a petitioner were to come in and we were insisting on 2 reviews and some get through in 1. There's quite a bit of time and expense associated with a second review, and I'm not sure that we're applying the same standards to all petitioners.
Through the chair, Mr. Doherty, you raised an excellent question. I don't have a prepared response, but I would just say that this proposed site plan and landscape plan is far enough in detail. Basically, the applicant feels that the site plan that they're proposing will not change. This is what they intend to build. They know that, and they've asked for final site plan approval. Also, the landscape plan is very well developed. It shows all the planting details and all the things that we come to expect, minus the irrigation plan and maintenance plan. And that's a condition of approval. We often see at concept level that the landscape plan it doesn't have that level of detail and is subject to change. In this case, they're certain of what it'll look like. They've provided the plans to you. You wouldn't, if we were to approve this and then as a concept instead of as a final, and then a month from now or 2 months from now, look at it again, it would not change in any way. Hence the opportunity to skip that and go straight to final. But I will take note of your a comment about a checklist and better explanation on justification, or guidance on how we would go from concept straight to final in these cases, and try and provide a response to you tomorrow or by email, or I'll speak with my boss and see how we can respond to your question.
I think it would be of benefit to this commission if we had a standard that we could adhere to. I agree with many of the points, and many of the points that you've brought up may become that criteria that I'm looking for, but we have had this conversation on numerous previous occasions, and I just want to be fair to all petitioners. I agree with all the points that you've made, and I am prepared to move this through to final, but it is somewhat awkward. It puts us in a bad situation of perhaps being unfair to all the petitioners, and I think it's just a little bit of administrative work to clear that up so that we have clear guidance. That's all I have.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, would the applicant please come forward and make a presentation?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Tim Potter with Dowell HKM. With me tonight is Kevin Denier, our landscape architect. I will come back and address a couple of the questions or comments relative to final versus concept that Mr. Doherty brought up that I think separate this project, but I agree it would be nice as a petitioner's representative to have something in writing to differentiate and tell exactly what process we should go through. The purpose and intent here is to place the 20,000 square foot addition onto the existing USGS building that was completed a few years ago on the APU campus. I know the picture's not great, but let me hold it up. Here's Providence Drive that comes to here. This is Elmore. This is University Drive that goes in. Grant Hall is up here. This is where the primary educational facilities are. The Kargatstein building is here. The new USGS building is here and rests right along the edge of the bluff line. And that was done originally for a couple of reasons. First, to provide a low-profile building from the campus core to preserve the views out to the south and to the mountains, which is one of the prescribed issues on campus, that they have low-rise buildings. The other thing is that the basement level of the existing building is basically a warehouse for rocks, and that's a storage unit in the basement, basically, with a driveway ramp that goes down to it at this side. Because USGS does collect a lot of samples from around the state, brings them back to the facility, and then works and analyzes the materials there in-house. At this time, USGS is a tenant in the new building, this building over here where you go and pick up your maps, and then Gould Hall, which is one of the older buildings on the APU campus. Long rectangular building built back, I believe, in the 50s or 60s. And with that in mind, the age of the building and its ability to meet their needs, they've looked at, USGS put out an RFP to expand their ability to consolidate with their existing new building. So as this addition comes into service and is completed, The USGS personnel that are currently in Gould Hall will then be shifted over and moved to the new facility. Gould Hall will then remain, and they will backfill it with professors and administrative staff that are in overcrowded conditions in Grant Hall. As I know Mr. Doherty knows, because RIM has done some of the examinations of the facilities on campus, that capital expenditures are a big deal for APU as a private university. They're not cash rich, and they look at things, how to get the most life out of everything, because they don't have a big capital budget. So this will allow them to not build any new buildings for themselves, but be able to accommodate people with more gracious space. So that, just to establish kind of the historical context that we have here, is the situation. The new addition of the building is just an extension to the west, again along the edge of the bluff line. Very similar building, similar setup with foundations. It steps a little bit to the south to address the curve in the ridge line that's currently there. And I'll let Kevin talk a little bit more about that. But with that in mind, as the people move from Gould Hall over and existing employees that are on campus then backfill Gould Hall, the beauty of this is that there's no net increase in the number of people bringing vehicles to the campus and parking. So it's a no net increase in parking requirements. So with that, we are also processing, APU itself has been in the process now for about 8 or 9 months in developing and processing through the municipal system under a new ordinance, a institutional master plan, which we've been working with the Municipal Traffic Engineering Department to consolidate an overall campus way of approaching what the parking standards are and requirements for the campus and different types of uses, so that we don't build a lot of parking lots that we don't need. We've done about 5 parking studies out here at the campus over about the last decade or so, and found that even today there's plenty of parking available. And we have been working with the municipal traffic engineer. In the PLI, they can grant variances, more than 10% variances administratively, based on information and data that's brought forward. And we've shown that even with this facility, there's adequate parking on campus in relative close by areas to meet the parking needs of the campus. And APU, number one, doesn't want to build more parking necessarily because it costs money, but also that they are a fairly green campus and have tried to preserve the trees as much as they can. And in that vein, Kevin will come up and talk about the actual details of the landscape plan and that, but I wanted to go through the recommended conditions by staff. We're in agreement with all but number 3. Number 3 says to provide interior parking lot landscaping calculations to meet current code requirements. This is effectively an existing parking lot. There's very slight modifications to it by this addition in the building. And because of the long linear nature of the parking that's been developed over the years along the top of the bluff line, you can see easily over 100, 150, 200 feet of green space between Providence or the University Drive and the parking lots. And it's been APU's effort over the years to consolidate its parking into a narrow ribbon along this area to retain as many of the trees as possible, to have a buffer adjacent to the core of the campus. So by taking parking spaces out of commission to plant trees on the interior in several locations, I think is not really merited based on the number of trees that are preserved on both the south side and the north side of this ribbon of parking, and would require that we then create more parking spaces and take more trees down, which doesn't quite make sense to plant trees here and take mature trees down someplace else in the very same location. So with that, we're in agreement with those, but would request that this be worded differently to say resolve the need to provide interior parking lot landscaping, and let us sit down with staff and work that through.
Chairperson Sawhill and Board of Commissioners, my name is Kevin Denier. I'm the landscape architect on this project, and I just wanted to go over a few site and landscape features. As you can see in the first board to my left here, it shows the building addition with the existing facility, and we're trying to create a seamless connection through the architecture as well as through the landscape. Also, this is a building that's tucked, the existing building's kind of tucked into the slope there, as well as this building will be as well, and it will take advantage of some of the southern exposure with office spaces and the windows facing to the south, with views through the trees into University Lake. We're also, just like the existing building, trying to minimize some of the clearing around the facility. We have cleared around there the footprint that we needed to construct the facility, and the last board there, farthest from myself on the left, shows where there will be a stormwater detention pond incorporated into the slope, into the clearing behind the building. But we're still leaving enough, I think, an ample amount of space back there between this facility, enough buffer, landscape buffer between this facility and University Lake Drive and that cul-de-sac that ends at near the hotel there. I just wanted to note that there are loading berths that are sufficient for this entire facility on the easternmost side of the existing facility, and that meets the requirement for the site plan. The landscape matches the existing landscape plan on the existing facility, brings ribbons of gravel and boulders and birch trees through the front to the front of the building. There are access points on the westernmost side of the new addition and on the northeastern side there. There was a condition about relocating the bike racks, and the bike racks exist currently on the west, kind of the western corner of the building, the existing building, and so we'd have to move those because we have a door coming out. In the middle plan there, it's the kind of northeastern. The bike racks are located in this location here, and I was out there today, and I've been out there a few times, and I've noticed there's pretty heavy use, so we are going to actually take those bike racks and probably just put them into the landscape bed here. We'll have to probably move some trees around, but we want to make sure that the bike racks are accommodated. As well, we thought potentially we could add some bike racks on the westernmost side of the facility where there's an entrance for the staff into the offices there. Another condition that I noted or saw was that we needed to have some striping and signage on our plan that would go across to where the bell tower is, and we're going to be providing that on our permitting drawings. Finally, I think one of the last conditions was about the irrigation, or how is it going to be maintained, and APU would be maintaining the landscape, and there are hose bibs provided in 3 locations on the extreme west side, kind of closer to the middle building, and then on that northeast corner. So with that, I'll take any questions with that.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant? Mr. Dinwiddie?
With the new Title 21 requirements, interior landscaping and irrigation were 2 big ones that were debated at length, probably for at least a year, if not more. And both of those requirements are ex-nate in this plan. I guess, how do you explain that? And that's my biggest question, is how do you explain that in the sense that, that commission made great lengths to those? How do we explain to the next petitioner that doesn't have, that we say those are requirements and we approve your plan as is?
So you had a comment about the interior parking lot landscaping as well as the irrigation?
The interior, condition number 3 and the irrigation, those 2 things are huge issues on the new requirements for Title 21 that just got passed, the interior planting requirements and irrigation on all new facilities. And how do we explain to the next petitioner based on Title 21's pretty much in the can already?
So irrigation in terms of automatic irrigation, is that what you're suggesting? Or okay.
Or surface irrigation, irrigation in general. The most Title 21 is requiring all new structures have in-ground irrigation.
Is the proposed Title 21? Well, that wasn't included in the existing facility, and if they had, they'd probably continue that. They haven't done that for the existing building, so they're just continuing what's been done with the existing. So they are using hoses to water that landscape, and so we're just continuing with that.
It's not a huge amount of landscaping.
Right.
It's pretty small.
It's very small.
My other comment was 24,000 on 6.6 million. That's like 3/1000% for landscaping.
Well, you can look at the site and see how much landscaping we have to do. The building is tucked up very close to the sidewalk, which is, a requirement to have between parking, a new facility and parking. So there just isn't that much space to put landscaping in.
How are the soils here?
The soils?
The soils for the building.
I think they're pretty good. I think they're good. Vegetated right now, so pretty good soils.
I don't have any further questions. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
How come there's no landscaping on the south side of the building?
Well, again, what we're trying to do is tighten up the clearing limits of the site, and so in order to do that,
Why aren't you landscaping the new slope?
In the new slope. So we've again tried to tighten that up as much as we can, so we have a 2-to-1 slope, and generally I don't like to plant in 2-to-1 slopes because of the steepness, and I don't want if we specify larger plant material in there, I don't want it to erode away or fall down or not properly grow in the landscape. So 2-to-1 has been a slope that I've tried to stay away from in terms of planting new trees.
Well, we have a nicely wooded slope and bench, and then we're going to have this one area where there's going to be nothing, and then there's no plants being replaced, is my concern.
Mr. Sahel, I understand what you're saying, and let me just try and explain a little bit, and it may not be the answer that you're looking for, but as you follow the bluff line, it curves a little bit to the south at the location this building's been put in. And the existing slope itself is steeper than 2-to-1. So in order to meet the requirements of the building codes and public works, we're going to a 2-to-1. So effectively the slope from beyond the building where the footing is out will be at a 2-to-1, which is less steep than what the current condition is, as required by the city. So that vegetation will be cleared, back slope put on, and the slope stabilized. The area down at the base of the hill is then remaining trees that are about 200 feet from the base of the hill out to where the extension of University Lake Drive is. So again, I think I have to reiterate, and back to Mr. Dinwiddie's question, why aren't there landscaping in the parking lots and those kinds of things? It's existing parking lots. Seems to us that the least disruption when you've got hundreds of feet of dense land, existing vegetation that's been retained around this one bay basic parking area, that's a benefit versus having a different situation than having a Walmart parking lot or a bigger parking lot with multiple bays to have one parking space taken out here and a couple of new little trees. It seems counterproductive to me as a planner and somebody very familiar with this campus and what people feel about cutting trees, big trees, towards the core of the campus to go take out, to get parking spaces anywhere close to this building, you'd have to take down mature trees. And it seems a little bit inappropriate to me anyway to suggest that it would be better to put little landscaping pods in the interior of a single bay parking area and take out some bigger trees that create a bigger participatory buffer between the core of the campus and this area. The other thing is I think we also need to respect a little bit that there's very little change going on with this development on the existing parking lot. So effectively a grandfathered situation. We're retaining the existing parking that's there. In fact, even eliminating a little bit of parking that's currently there. So I think that creates a different context than what you're typically dealing with 200 or 300 or 400 car parking lots at different locations or facilities like the public library or consortium library out on campus or something else. It's a different situation. If you haven't been out to the site, which I hope you have, I think that you'd see that the landscaping, existing vegetation that's been retained here versus other projects in town is pretty incredible and is really the way that we should be going. So when you talk about what the budget is for the landscaping and how poor that seems, keep in context what's been kept on the site and what the value of those trees might be. So if we wanted to get into the math and start talking about how much is a 50-year-old tree worth that's maybe got an 8 or 10 inch DVH, let's start tacking the value, or let us count that. Maybe there ought to be, this is how much you're spending on new landscaping, but what's the value of the trees that you saved? Maybe that's a better way to look at things in another way, just to get out on the table.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty, you have questions?
Yeah, I was just, a similar question on your civil sheet 3.01 that you included. You indicated topsoil and seed on the downside slope, and I think that that would appear on a landscaping plan potentially. It's just the renderings that have been done place all the emphasis on the north side of the building. I'd also, just to sort of echo what the petitioner is saying, we have what I can't say for certain, but I think it was double-loaded parking that now is becoming single-loaded parking that has landscaping and trees on one side, which is very much like a landscaping peninsula or island, or there's ways of considering this interior parking lot landscaping if you really wanted to stretch that. I guess I get back to I think this was governed by a PLI, the site, and I don't know. I mean, the new Title 21 is not yet adopted, and we have this discussion a lot about what is the boundaries and what is the purpose of what we're doing. I think at some level we're enforcing the requirements of the code, and I don't know that we have the authority to relax the requirements of the code, but I don't know how much authority we would have to hold the petitioner to a standard that is not yet in the code, and I would be reluctant to do that, but say that I think that they've and what they're doing by providing mature trees on a single loaded drive aisle with parking is somewhat consistent with the intent of interior landscaping, especially in a fully wooded site. So, I'd be inclined to give them a break, given the fact that we are talking about a ribbon of parking and not an ocean of parking. But that's maybe a gray interpretation, and I would be hesitant to say that we're allowing any relaxation of the requirements of the code, and I'm just going to assume that the information that's been presented is reinforcement that you are, in fact, meeting the requirements of the code, and leave it at that. I did want some clarification, though, Mr. Potter. You had said that many of the people that are being located in this addition, this 20,000 square foot addition, are coming from the adjacent Gould Hall or something like that, and therefore no additional parking is required. I mean, wouldn't there be backfill in Gould Hall? I mean, you are adding square footage to the campus, and wouldn't that trigger some modification to the
and that's been a big discussion with the municipal traffic engineer in examining it. APU has gone on record with the municipal traffic engineer that the only use that Gould Hall would be put to would be to backfill existing professor or staff people that are currently in Grant Hall to be over there. It won't be leased out to another party. It won't be anything like that without the parking being reevaluated. So there is no net increase in personnel that are going to be on the campus once this addition is done.
But in my mind, if you add an extra 25,000 square feet of building, unless you demolish 20 or 25,000 square feet of building, you've put additional building resources and therefore additional parking load.
Sure, and that's, I think that's why you have to look at the special nature of a campus and a university. That, yes, technically, by the code, by adding this 20,000 square feet and opening up a 20,000 square foot building across the parking lot, are we having a net increase in the total amount of square footage on the campus? Yes. But you have to look at how does it function and how does it operate. If the people over in Grant Hall, as you're aware, are crammed into closets and they simply spread that same number of people out into that space, yes, they have increased the square footage of total building on the campus, but they haven't increased the number of people on the campus. And it's not necessarily the square footage that creates a driver that has to park a car. It's the people that are there that are driving to the campus that park the car and need the car parking space. And that's why institutions are being looked at differently and have a new code within the current Title 21 that allows a master plan to come forward that looks at the functional nature of the building, not the code required things that we've looked at in the past necessarily, and recognizes that based on evidence over a decade of parking sampling studies, that a lot of the kids that go to school there and students don't drive cars. And we've got percentages in total number of vehicles, the number of professors that actually have vehicles, the USGS staff. So we've proved up to the satisfaction of the city traffic engineer that, in fact, the square footage and functions on that campus do not generate the square footage that an office space at 1 to 300 or 1 to 250 for medical office does in pure Title 21. So unlike many of the office spaces in town or office buildings in town, we've done a specific study to see what the actual performance of the campus, so we know what the needs are, know what the demands are, and we know what's provided. And there is adequate parking on campus, and we will not be increasing the demand by having this old building brought online to separate and give people that work on campus more office space.
Thank you.
Mr. Garcia?
Well, Mr. Doherty touched upon two topics I was going to mention, but I did have a question about, I'll continue the discussion as we were talking about. So are you saying Grant Hall is currently over capacity?
Yes.
So they're outside of code as far as fire protection and occupants for the building?
They are packed in tighter than what they would like to have to make sure that their professors and staff are happy, yes.
So you're saying what they're happy with, but I'm asking, like, code-wise for fire marshals, are they over capacity? Are they in violation of the fire code?
They are not in violation of the fire code.
So even by reducing their capacity now, they're still capable of, with growth, of reinstating the same capacity that they have now in that facility? I'm just saying, like...
Could they legally, from a fire code standpoint, if they did any tenant improvements in Gould Hall and changed it from what it currently is now, there would be significant fire code upgrades that would be required that would probably exceed the functional value of the building.
That's what you're talking about. There's no upgrades that are happening in Grant Hall. They're just taking people out. They're leaving the building as it is, and theoretically, if they needed to house more people, they can just put them right back into those spaces, correct? I'm just asking.
On a theoretical basis, yes, they could. I don't know, Jim, how hard is it to give one of your employees an office and then get them out of it into a cubicle?
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not saying you're putting those people back in. I'm just saying if they have new hires, they could put them.
No, I understand what you're saying.
I'm not. Yeah. Okay. So with that being said, how is the parking capacity for those buildings based on this one lot?
From a revised code provision of what we've shown with our parking studies, you could utilize Gould Hall for office space for people off campus and still have adequate parking.
Okay. The second point, I actually was interested in Mr. Doherty's interpretation of the interior landscaping. It sort of makes sense if you have a one driveway throughway that by having landscaping on both sides, it's almost considered interior landscaping because it's not, there's no other parking space to break up or no other lane. It's a interesting interpretation. Sort of brings to light a good question there.
Correct, but it is interesting.
It's a very good insight. Just want to mention that. The next question I had was also what Mr. Doherty had brought up about the seating on the 2-to-1 slope. What kind of, I agreed it should have been on a landscaping plan, but what kind of vegetation are we talking about as far as seating? It's not really specific. Are we talking about a wildflower? Are you putting some kind of jute mesh stabilizer down to hold the bank temporarily?
Well, I think we would need some stabilization, and it would be in terms of compacting the slope, because that's going to hold part of the building. The footing's going to be in there.
Yeah.
So we need to have that properly compacted to hold that footing. But we are going to put a seed mix down, just like a no-mow seed mix, something that wouldn't have to be maintained, but would quickly grab and hold that slope and prevent any erosion there.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure because it showed the no-mow seed mix on the south side, but didn't show what was going on the slope. Or did I get my sides mixed?
The north side shows the no-mow seed mix, and we would just continue that around to that south side.
Outside, okay. That's all I had.
Mr. Dinwiddie?
I guess I reiterate Commissioner Daugherty's comments on the parking, and I guess I was confused early on about the amount of foot traffic and bicycle traffic and the traffic counts, and that that makes sense about no interior landscaping. But on sheet, I guess one of my biggest concerns is Civil Sheet 2.0. Note number 3, you have a clearing limit, and we're talking about, you mentioned about trees, and I guess the clearing limit is, you're going to take a considerable amount of trees out, existing mature trees that you talked about with that clearing limit, and a lot of that has to do with your 2-to-1 slope that supports the backside of those footers. Is it conceptually possible to, instead of doing your 2-to-1 what you vegetated, could you do a green wall, a live vegetated green wall that's a little bit more vertical, even if it's stepped vertical, to shorten that up, reduce your clearing limit, and keep more trees? That's my first question. If from a civil engineering standpoint, if you could shorten that clearing limit up by going vertical, do a green wall, some kind of sack slope protection that is live vegetated, that it's pretty steep, but you might be able to step it in 2 different directions, do geogrid the whole 9 yards. And is that conceptually possible to save more trees? The second question I have is, if you do keep that clearing limit at note 3, who's going to enforce that clearing limit? Because you're basically asking us to give you credit for the existing trees, which I'm all about, saving big mature trees, but at the same time, I've been on jobs, I've cleared trees for general contractors that, that clearing limit can easily scoot out 10 more feet, and there's 100 trees that are gone, that are big trees. So it's almost like there's either got to be a balance between a condition that clearing limit is strictly enforced, or that maybe you shorten that clearing limit up by doing a different kind of retaining wall on the back slope.
Well, let me just go on the record. I'll go ahead and go out and we will survey and I will flag and or fence that clearing limits boundary like I do on a lot of the projects that I'm involved in, where it's Alyeska Resort, where we don't want to have the trees come down around the building. And I think you have to say that there's some very big trees adjacent to the Alyeska Hotel, the university housing out on UAA's campus. I have, since my hair is a lot grayer than yours, probably more experience with contractors. I even had a guy, when I went out and set the clearing limits out on the University of Alaska Anchorage campus housing, where all the trees that were flagged were to be saved. There was a beautiful, like 5-stemmed birch tree. One of the stems on this tree that had a trunk and then had these beautiful, it was a beautiful tree. And the guy with the chainsaw saved the one trunk that had the flag on it and cut the other 4 off. So I understand what you're talking about, and I will personally have a meeting with Hickle Construction on the job site before any of the clearing activity happens to make sure that that clearing limits is held tight. So, yeah, that's something I'm very sensitive to.
How about covered bike structures? IPU is a big bike campus, especially in the winter, and a lot of bike structures are doing a covered bike outdoor structure. Is that I know you're talking about adding bike racks. Is there any thought to doing a covered bike racks? Obviously budget's but you're pretty light on landscaping budget, so throwing a few amenities in there probably isn't a hurt.
It is not in the budget, but there's possibly a better approach. There is access into the building, and the storage area, the rock storage room downstairs, which has a loading dock ramp all the way to the door. There's nothing to prevent access to that for bike storage inside the building. Now, if someone chooses to say that it's not convenient and they want to come in the other door and we have a bike rack there, they do have the opportunity to put the bike indoors, whether it's in their office, which I know that they allow, as well as in the basement portion of the building. So, but you're right, it is a heavily bicycle and pedestrian campus.
I don't have anything further. Thanks.
Any other comments from commissioners? Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I prepared a few remarks on the spot to address the request by the petitioner to remove condition number 3 or to amend it. First of all, I'm just going to go to that section of code and read what it says. It says, visual enhancement landscaping shall be planted within the interior of a parking area containing more than 60 spaces. The area devoted to visual enhancement landscaping shall be equal at least 5% of the surface of the parking area, including appurtenant driveways. The UDC doesn't have the authority to waive this requirement of code. That would be addressed through a landscape variance request in front of the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. I'm going to now read from a different section of code that deals with nonconforming structures, and surface parking is considered a structure. This is from Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 21, 55-040, nonconforming structures. No such nonconforming structure may be enlarged or altered in a way that increases its nonconformity, but any structure or portion thereof may be altered in decrease its nonconformity. So the deal here is if you're going to build or make changes to a site, you have to bring it into compliance with current Title 21 requirements. What the Commission could do is to add to that condition of approval. Currently, it says provide interior parking lot landscaping calculations meeting Title 21, 45-080 X 10 landscaping for parking. But you could add or establish nonconforming rights, as the petitioner has contended that they have possibly nonconforming rights. And then you could also add or obtain a variance from the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. Those are the ways to get around having to comply with that code requirements. The objective of the interior landscaping requirement is to break up vast parking spaces or areas. That's all I have.
Mr. McLaughlin, I have a kind of a follow-up to that. It's my understanding when we do additions to buildings and new parking is required for those additions, that the parking that's dedicated for the addition must meet the current code requirements. So in this case, if they can determine with the traffic engineer how much of the existing parking should be allocated to this structure, then they would be required to go in and provide interior landscaping for that portion of the parking. So if they come back and find that this needs 20 spaces or 40 spaces or whatever's appropriate, then I believe the correct interpretation of the code is they need to provide interior landscaping for that portion of the parking lot that is dedicated to this new parking. Isn't that correct?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think what you're saying is that rather than
they don't have to
5%.
retrofit the entire campus and the entire parking lot with interior landscaping. They only have to retrofit the parking lot portion that is dedicated to this addition.
I think, I guess staff doesn't have a position on that.
I'm okay with the petitioner working with the traffic engineer to find out how much parking is really needed on campus. I think that's a good exercise and something they should complete. And I'm okay with, once that's done, them resolving how much interior landscaping is required to be supportive of this structure. So that's kind of where I'm headed with these conditions. And I'm not sure how to craft that condition, but maybe we can work on that.
My understanding is the same exact as yours, is if you add addition, you factor out the parking for that addition, and that's the part that's affected by the change.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Doherty.
Yeah, I guess the open question I have in response to that, and I just don't want to get into a situation where the UDC is sort of counting parking spaces in a very complex master plan to make sure that the petitioner has the right number of parking spaces. If the petitioner has a strategy, if the campus is built with 1,000 parking spaces and the buildings only require 50, if he puts more square footage on that campus, is he required to build more parking spaces? I think the petitioner has come to us and said there is more than adequate parking available on the campus. Now, he can settle that with the parking engineer, and I'll let him do that. But to say that because he's put 25,000 square feet of more building, that doesn't necessarily trigger a 1 per 250 parking lot that associates with that, if in fact there is adequate parking on the campus. And I think that the new Title 21, with the movement towards reducing parking islands or parking area, would support that. But I don't think that we want to get into, like I say, counting the parking spaces and say, you petitioner need to add 5 spaces or 10 spaces and you need to put this landscaping in. That's the one thing. And then the other thing is, the point I was trying to make earlier is that if we don't have multiple drive aisles and multiple parking stalls, if we have a single drive aisle and a double loaded parking arrangement, you don't have the ability to put islands in your drive aisle. The only interior landscaping would be to displace parking spaces, right? So having a single loaded corridor is in effect the same as having an extended peninsula of interior parking, in my opinion. You're not going to accomplish anything different than what they've done here with this landscaping. So, I would say that we want to be reasonable, and I think the recommendation that the petitioner has to state how this is going to be resolved to make sure that all parties are satisfied is reasonable. And I'd be hesitant to lay on a bunch of other requirements that I think are outside of our boundary. Francis brings up a good point. We are bound by the requirements of the codes, and I think we hold the petitioner to those requirements, but I don't think we enforce them here in this body.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the board or staff? Seeing none. Mr. Potter, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make to us before we wrap this up?
No, but I'm definitely leaning in the direction of, I know that I have to resolve before we get the building permit that issue with several levels of staff review. And I feel fine, and rather than having us dictate or resolve the issue of what actually is grandfather rights or nonconforming status now, and how many spaces are we actually leaving that are currently there, which is where Mr. Doherty was kind of going. I think we're going to come out that we're not displacing and creating 15 new parking spaces in an area that wasn't parking before. And I understand all the issues that are associated with this, but I think it would be best handled by letting us sit down with code enforcement and planning, traffic engineer, and get it resolved. There's other ways to do it. If you look at the real way that you calculate or can calculate the parking, if we simply put a trail through the trees north of the 15 parking spaces that we're talking about, technically the landscaping between the trail and the parking area would become interior landscaping. And at that point, then we're weighing this issue of what is the most reasonable, probably least expensive, least hassle approach to doing it. So, you know, it may not be that we'd take a parking space out if we have to provide the interior landscaping. My opinion is that we don't need to. If we have to, there's a variety of different ways to do that. And we will work that out with staff before we get our permit.
I guess I have one last question for you. Would you object to adding a seventh condition that requires installation of construction fence prior to clearing?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Mr. Potter. With that, the matter rests with the board. And I need a brave soul to make a motion in this case. Mr. Doherty.
I'd like to move to approve case 2011-034 as meeting the requirements for final landscaping. I'm sorry, is that for final landscape plan review, subject to staff conditions 1 through 6, with a modification on condition number 3. To resolve the need to provide interior parking lot landscaping with the traffic department and with the muni review agencies, and establish, non-conforming rights as was recommended. I'd also like to add a condition 7 to install construction fencing prior to clearing to protect the trees that are intended to be protected.
May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Dinwiddie. Mr. Doherty, would you please speak to your motion?
Yeah, we've kind of spoken to some of the points already about, what our purview is here. I just want to reinforce that I do think that the design as presented is consistent with many of the objectives and policies of the 2020 comp plan, including policies 6, 7, 42, 43, 44, specifically 49 and 50. I also think it's consistent with the Alaska Pacific Master Plan update, land use plan, and I think that the design will be compatible with existing and planned land uses in the surrounding neighborhood and with the intent of the district as it's presented. I am concerned about how detailed we probe into parking requirements on a master plan of this type. That's why I've included language in the condition 3 to allow that complicated issue to be worked out with the designer who's most familiar and has the data to support his position, and we'll work it out with the authorities having jurisdiction.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Dinwiddie, do you have any comments to add?
I support the former chair's position. He eloquently laid it out, and I like the idea. The concept of biking and walking, I think the petitioner has that down in addition, and I fully support condition 7, the construction of fencing. I would like to see as many trees saved as possible to support the non-changes to the parking lot. Thank you.
Are there any other commissioner comments? Is there objection to the motion? Seeing none, that passes. Before we get to our last case, I'd like to take a 5-minute break. So with that, we'll stand down. Our next and last case for tonight is a request from the municipality of Anchorage for a site plan and public road review for a context-sensitive solution transportation project site plan and landscape plan review for East 32nd Avenue reconstruction and upgrade project located near Muldoon Road to Brook Ridge Drive. Staff, may we have a presentation?
Yes, the project goal is to improve 36th Avenue between Muldoon Road and Brook Ridge Drive from its current status as a local road to a Class IC neighborhood collector with 2 lanes. The proposed 32nd Avenue improvements would upgrade 2,100 linear feet of roadway to collector standards. The street is in the process of being reclassified as a Class 1C residential collector from a current status as a local road. The project will allow safe access to pedestrians walking to the Totem Theater complex and nearby fast food outlet, which are both significant draws for neighborhood children. Also part of the project is a 6.5-foot wide parking lane on the north side of the street. A decorative barrier is planned for the top of the Keystone Modular Block retaining wall. The height of the retaining walls will not exceed 4.5 feet. Crosswalks are shown at each of the intersections. With this project, the biggest issue was the lack of right-of-way. It was narrower than normally we'd like to see for a collector road. So given the limited right-of-way, there's little space to provide landscaping. However, where space permits, trees are included in the project in a few locations. And it's the intention that the maintenance of landscaping within the right-of-way will be done by the adjacent homeowner.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Evidently not. Would the applicant please come forward and make a presentation?
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, once again, my name is Terry Schoenthal. I'm with USKH, and we are currently under contract by the municipality of Anchorage to do the landscape improvements portion of the design work and the public involvement aspects of the project for 32nd Avenue. To give you a little bit of bearing of where that actually is, if you're on Muldoon Road, you're probably familiar with where Totem Theaters is on that, not far from the Big Bend where it comes around the corner onto Tudor. And the 32nd Avenue is the road immediately to the south of Totem Theater, extending back into the neighborhood. And it's actually a really interesting project because I think it's one that as a community will face more frequently in the future. And that's that it's a strip paved road that served as a local road for a long time. But as other streets have developed in the immediate area, they've all accessed off of 32nd Avenue, and in fact 32nd Avenue serves as a collector right now. It has no pedestrian facilities on it. Local kids travel frequently up and down the roadway going to Totem Theater and to the McDonald's, which is nearby. And it's a hazardous place. It's really kind of amazing to go out and actually watch it in operation out there. But once you add the snow berms and everything else, it's just not a very safe place for pedestrians. It's interesting in the sense that it really has been, I think, a context-sensitive exercise because it's been done that way out of necessity. The roadway width, the right-of-way width right now is pretty minimal, and the fact is that Commissioner Garcia noted, I think, that he had a duplex in the area, and right now on the south side of that road, it's just a continuous line of duplexes with parking right off of 32nd Avenue. And so working with the community, we came up with a solution. The design criteria manual would say you've got to have 2 pedestrian walkways, one on either side of it. And it really doesn't work in this case. And working with neighborhood residents, the solution that we've come up with is actually on the north side of the street, on the Totem Theater side, there really are very few driveway accesses. And so the new pedestrian walkway has been put on that side. Interestingly enough, the school district has property right next to Totem Theater. And on that particular piece of property, the right-of-way was entirely missing. In other words, the right-of-way only went from the southern border up to the center line of the street. So there was a serious issue of acquiring the necessary right-of-way to bring this into, bring the project into being at all. And so in the process of that, we're looking to acquire right-of-way at Totem Theater and at the school district property to actually separate the walkway at that location. We're also proposing to put on-street parking, which is also not typical of a collector roadway, on the north side of the street, because in the process of adding curb and gutter and storm drainage, the parking, which serves all of these duplexes on the south side, will destroy the ability to park as many cars as are there now. And so what we're trying to do is offset that need by some additional parking on the north side. And this has been sort of a long process with actual community residents and other people in the area of how to accomplish the goals of being able to park the cars that are there now, of being able to provide better for pedestrians in the neighborhood, to deal with bad storm drainage situation, many of the things that actually happen on older strip paved roads in our community. And I think there are a number of other ones that have come before you in recent times. 35th and McRae comes to mind, and some others. But I think that we'll probably see more of these in the future as we look to upgrade some of the residential roadways that actually serve our community as collector streets. It's been noted that landscape opportunities are pretty minimal, and they are. And so we're looking at some kind of a gateway feature with landscaping at the intersection with Muldoon, and that would be on the south side because there is expanded right-of-way at that location. Then where additional right-of-way is being acquired, we're looking to add some landscaping on that portion of the project as well. And then in another few key areas. And the landscape that I think that was mentioned by staff about the residential users actually maintaining that is that in some of these residential streets that are being upgraded to collector status, the landscape or the property owner's property really just goes down to the street. And so, and even if it's in the right of way and landscape improvements go in, the owner of the adjacent property typically kind of takes ownership of that landscape. And in general, on previous projects, even roadway improvement districts and things of that nature, those landscapes are often just drawn into the landscape of the adjacent private property owner and are maintained that way. The notion that the city, it would be great if the city had the resources to come out and maintain all of these, but the fact is they don't, and so typically the neighborhoods tend to adopt them. It's a relatively simple project. It will provide curb and gutter, sidewalks, storm drain improvements, which probably will have one of the most significant impacts for the neighborhood because the drainage there is terrible right now. And there will be a walkway on the north side, and I think it's a pretty straightforward project in that sense. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Schoenthal. Mr. Doherty?
Just a couple of questions. I'm trying to visualize that. I drive down that street. I've got family that live in that neighborhood. It seems as though some of those duplexes, it's kind of like driveway after driveway after driveway, and you're showing maybe a little bit of grass in between the driveways. Has there been any thought to, because I don't think that grass has got a prayer of surviving, is there any thought of doing Bowmanite or some sort of ornamental textured paving or something to maybe achieve the same thing but isn't just going to die and get parked over the top of?
Well, I would note that on the side where that happens, there's actually almost no right-of-way available at all. In other words, we're putting in curb and gutter on that particular side, the side with the driveways, but there's no sidewalk coming up to it. It's just their property on the back side. So in actuality, there isn't even room to be looking at a narrow Bowmanite strip or something that's in between those driveways. That's private property at those locations versus...
Some of those are even steep, and it just doesn't seem like a grass or lawn or turf is really even has a chance.
Well, there is some growing out there now, but we're not going into those. We're trying to actually maintain those driveways as much as we can, just because they need to have that for parking at those locations. And on the opposite side of the street, we're providing some on-street parking because the simple act of putting in curb and gutter, I mean, people are shocked to find out that the right-of-way is where it is when you go out and stake it. And so the simple act of putting in curb and gutter is, right now, many of those duplexes park 2 cars deep in those driveways, and that will not be a possibility once this project is completed.
So I'm just trying to sort of think out of the box, maybe not on this project, but, how do we handle these sort of multi-driveway, multi-family type of residences? The other thing that I was thinking about is, it was brought to my attention a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about public art and how a lot of the powder-coated finishes are not as durable. I mean, it seems like 10 years ago, powder coat was all the buzz. There was a new facility, and we could get powder-coated stuff. But now, 10 years down the line, I just did a walk around downtown. A lot of the wayfinding kiosks, the powder coat has all come off the base. A lot of those ornamental sort of fencing that you put in, powder coat is all gone. The parking meters, I know they use salts and things like that, but I also remember the powder-coated screens on Elmore that all sort of corroded for one reason or another. I'm wondering if maybe automotive paint or something, maybe powder coat's not the right low-maintenance finish for some of these ornamental. I mean, I like your screen wall and I like what's happening, but I'm not as infatuated with powder coat finishes as low maintenance.
Well, I think your concern is a valid one, but there is a solution, and it's expensive. And that's that you use stainless steel underneath the powder coating. In other words, you powder coat stainless steel and it won't do that.
But what about just using automotive paint? Cars seem to hold up really well. Something
the problem is the problem with powder coating, there's a couple things. Automotive paint would probably do something as well. I don't know for a fact, but as soon as that barrier coat is breached in any way and the underlying surface of the metal can start to corrode, it very quickly corrodes along the base of on the inside surface of that paint. On a vehicle, I don't know. It's worth the research. I agree. I think that there may be a better way, but I also know for a fact that a lot of the really high-end site amenities manufacturers powder coat their trash cans and other things they build. They make them out of stainless steel. And the rust can't start to expand underneath the finish then because it doesn't rust. But it comes with a price tag.
Or maybe you're going the wrong direction. Maybe it's Corten or untreated steel that's just allowed to rust or, whatever. But I'm not going to make it a condition. It's the powder coating doesn't seem to work. And I saw the powder coating note. It's like we're repeating the same things that we know are not?
Well,
give it a-
one example that was completed on a project done relatively recently is that at the intersection of C Street and 100th Avenue, out by the new Target. Or not C Street and 100th Avenue, I'm trying to think. Is it? Yeah.
100, yeah.
There's a kind of a screen that's been put in on the corner of that, and it's intended to kind of screen all of the utility stuff that's in behind there. But that's all stainless steel mesh screening there, and yeah, it's a little bit spendy, but so far it's holding up really good.
Well, I know that stainless steel will work, but I also know the challenges involved in specing everything in stainless steel. Anyway, I wanted to point that out. I think you've done a great job with what we've got to work with here. This is the first sort of context-sensitive solution that's come up, so I felt that we'd sort of get some sort of general comments out there in approaching these types of projects.
I would say this is also, for me, it's a first because of recent changes. This project only comes before the Urban Design Commission once at 65%, whereas this project in the past would have come to you at DSR level and then again when it was 95% complete. So at this particular point in time, it's at a position where your suggestions can be reasonably taken into account and potentially modified. I think that staff has a comment in there, and I think it's relative to the process now, that the staff comment is that this shouldn't be brought to the Urban Design Commission until all of the right-of-way issues are resolved. And the fact is in my experience, it's unusual to have all the right-of-way issues resolved at 65%. I mean, this project's going to need right-of-way resolution, it's going to need easements for construction, a whole variety of things, and typically those don't all fall into place until you're virtually at 95%. So the idea that should be taken care of before we're coming to you at a 65% level, it's probably not entirely reasonable. But at the same time, I think that it's very reasonable for you to take a look at this and have concerns about the use of powder coat or what kind of landscaping we're looking to utilize on a project like this or where the sidewalks go and that sort of thing. And so in that sense, I would encourage you to provide those comments. But with regard to a comment specific to resolving right-of-way issues or resolving easements at this point in time, that's a thornier problem on a project like this when we're coming to you at 65%.
Well, I'll throw out another difficult one that I don't think that we've been able to solve in the past, and it seems to be budget-driven, not necessarily based on the size of Collector Road. But I think it was 88th Avenue, there's a whole discussion about protecting the trees from moose browse during a period of 2 to 3 years. And some projects we see have protective fencing, and some projects don't. In this, in East Anchorage, there's a lot of moose that come down off the mountains. Moose are a big deal. We lost, huge resources at Baggage Middle School due to moose browse. And this is even closer to the habitat. What are we doing in this project to assure that these funds aren't going to be just wasted on dead trees in a matter of years?
It's a good and a valid question, and for all of our road projects now, we include moose protection fencing, and it's very typical for staff comments to require that on a project like this, which I think it's justified. I think that the fencing needs to be on for a period of some time and taken care of, because due to normal wear and tear on the street, within 1 year that can get torn up, and so someone's got to come back out and make sure that that's kept up. But once a tree gets big enough, it'll hold its own against moose, although there are parts of town where that's a challenge.
Well, just a specific question on that. I mean, the difficulty when we discussed this in the past was fencing that lasts longer than the contractor's warranty period. How is that dealt with? So, first, am I hearing you correctly? You have specified moose protection fencing on this?
We will be specifying moose protection fencing for the landscape improvements that go in this project.
And then how do you control the removal of that fencing beyond the period of the warranty?
That's a good question, and it really comes down to city maintenance, because it does go beyond the requirements for a landscape contractor to do the maintenance on that.
Okay. I don't have any other.
Thank you. Mr. Gasek?
I have a couple questions here for you. The first is about the decorative guardrail. I was curious if there's other decorative guardrails in the neighborhood or adjacent areas that maybe used as an example for this existing or this proposed one, or if this is a new area that hasn't had other sorts of street amenities included in plans previously.
There are very few street amenities anywhere in this particular general area, to be honest.
It would be worth, I think, always a look just to make sure that there's some neighborhoods that have different identities as you go from street to street, and I think that would be an important thing to correct. The other thing that you mentioned that I didn't quite see in the plans, but that you mentioned in the presentation was the possibility of a gateway feature for the neighborhood.
It's a possibility. The neighborhood themselves brought this up at the most recent meeting. And so typically, I don't put that out every single time. I don't think it should be something that's a requirement for every go-around. But the fact is that this street actually had a gateway feature at one time that was removed. And this was brought up by local residents who said, you know, we'd like something back up over there.
Okay.
So
your comments appreciated then, because I think gateways need to be carefully considered, and every neighborhood doesn't need a gateway. So I appreciate the comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kasich. Ms. Ferguson?
Yes, I to follow up on Mr. Doherty's question about the decorative barrier and the powder coating issue. I had the same feeling when I looked at this and saw the mesh, and I thought, oh no, it's going to be another Elmore Road situation where that mesh will rust, but then I saw that it was intended to be stainless steel, and then thought, oh well, we won't have that issue. So that was very good to see that the mesh is going to be stainless steel and not powder coated, because we've seen in the past that it just doesn't hold up. So, and then another question about the moose fencing. Will you write into your specs, you know, when the moose fencing should be taken down? Is that something that is agreed upon with the Parks Department, that they're going to maintain the moose fencing for some period of time and then remove it?
Well, it's an interesting issue. I mean, it has to get coordinated really with Parks, but it's one that's been placed on us as designers, typically by the municipality. We're told we've got to have that in there. We specify it. We don't specify a removal time, although typically it's like 3 to 5 years within expectation.
Right.
But the fact is that no one's designated then to go out and actually deal with that. Parks does, but there isn't anything, there's no protocol for that.
So is that something maybe we might have some work session about to really deal with that, because it's just an outstanding issue that we might get together somehow between landscape architects and the Parks Department and UDC to try and work out this issue, because it's been, as you know, and UDC knows, it's been a kind of an ongoing issue for years that really hasn't had any resolution. It's just, I mean, since Monique Anderson was, you know, park superintendent, we've been talking about it that long, and really no resolution at this point. So maybe that's something we'll talk about at the end of the cases here tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Ms. Dinwiddie, Mr. Dinwiddie?
I've got a few. The ball fields that are there that just got recently built, will you have a trail to them off of 32nd?
There's been a lot of discussion about what to do with regard to those ball fields. There is access. Parks is responsible for providing a trail at some point. We looked at the possibility of including some link as part of this project, and it may be that we can provide a link from the sidewalk going into that area to some degree. But project management and engineering did not see that it was within their purview. At one point, there was a discussion of actually putting a parking lot over there that would support those ball fields that would be included in there, but based on the neighborhood actually had opposition to that on the notion that there's crime enough in the neighborhood as it is to create a place for that to be better facilitated. It shouldn't be on the part of the city, and further, road projects shouldn't be expected to provide parking for parks projects. So that, while that was considered, that was actually taken out. So right now, there is no provision for providing a trail that goes, you know, back to, it should be noted for other commissioners, I think, that those ball fields are quite well separated from the roadway itself. that they're back several hundred feet into that school district property. But that right now, this project does not provide for a trail linking those ball fields to 32nd Avenue.
The function of the guardrail design, is it screening? Is it barrier? What's the?
It's barrier. It's just best practices code issue of having a retaining wall that's as much as 4 feet high. Anything that's over 24 inches basically is on a best practices notion a pretty good idea to provide some kind of a guardrail.
And split rail, why is split rail not meet that code, or?
No, it does not.
Okay. And then lastly on moose fence, I can probably address this. We go collect it. We take our own moose fence down because it's valuable. It's reusable. We've reused miles of that stuff. But moose fence is something that after our warranty period is up, we go collect it and we take everything down and we reuse it on another project because it lasts forever. And so I'm not sure that's really a problem. I think it just really depends on whether the project allows you to remove it or not. And the only projects we have not removed it are projects where the munis directed us to leave it in place. And finally we did Abbott Road and we lost one tree out of 700 to a moose damage because we used a different. The project was different. There's ways to address moose damage, and it's not all fence and everything behind fences. And Begich Middle School, the problem with Begich Middle School was because you put such a small amount of trees. The physical size of the trees were such that the smaller moose could get to them, and they were yearly. The age of the tree was too young. It was 2-inch nursery grown birch. They were little guys, and the same trees we did at Begich Middle School that we put that were 3- and 4-inch caliper trees, the moose didn't touch them. Those were all still intact. And the same thing with other projects. It's all about the size of the tree that you put in. You understand that as well as I do, and there's other ways to. I'd hate to see us fence every single tree we ever plant in the city, and less is more, and sometimes you put a bigger tree in, you're not going to have the same problems that you're going to have with putting a little tree in. Protect the little guys, but let the big guys, because the problem with moose fence is if you see on Southport Boulevard, some of the moose fence that's been up for years, they've constricted the trees to where a tree that's supposed to grow out has grown columnar, and you've trained a tree to grow straight up with the moose fence, and you don't get the same exact, they just haven't removed the moose fence forever, and I think that's the exact problem. So.
Is there any other board member questions? Evidently not. Thank you for your comments. With that, the matter rests with the board. And I'd like to get a positive motion, please. Everyone's looking down. Someone's going to look up. Mr. Dinwiddie, thank you.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the plans for 32nd Avenue upgrade. I believe that it meets Title 21 and the Urban Design Commission's charter for collector streets, and I think that staff recommendations should be implemented, and we move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Dinwiddie. So your motion was for approval subject to staff's conditions as stated?
Yes.
Thank you. And we have a second from Mr. Doherty. Mr. Dinwiddie, you have any additional comments you want to add to the case?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I think it's generally a good design. It's definitely an improvement, both in the class and in the landscaping, and we've made the most, especially in acquiring additional right-of-way on the north side of the road where we're able to put some amenities in, like additional on-street parking and the trails and landscaping. I think you've improved the safety of the neighborhood and enhanced the visual beauty as well. I plan to support the motion.
Thank you. Any other board comments? Is there objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved. And that gets us to the end of our agenda. We have no public hearings or appearance requests tonight. That gets us to reports. Chair, I don't have any reports. I did intend to try to get a hold of the mayor's office to see where our appointments were, and you know, maybe Sharon, you can give us a report on that. I did make 2 notes for tonight that we have maybe a couple outstanding issues that maybe deserve some discussion or comment. The first was, when is it okay to go straight to a final site plan approval and bypass? So I'd like to, if you could pass that on to Ms. Chambers or Mr. Weaver, we would like some efforts on that part. And I think your comment, Sharon, on the fence, the moose fence installation removal is a good one. I actually appreciate, Mr. Dinwiddie, that you make a practice to remove it at the end of your maintenance requirement, the end of your warranty period, I guess, of 1 year. But I would think we would want the moose protection fences up for longer than a year.
Oh, yeah, it's totally useless. Yeah.
And so maybe we should do some work on that. And I guess the one last thing that I've thought of, and I don't know what the board's feeling is, and I think we need some work on. We've been promised by the municipality for quite a while to come up with some sign variance criteria that's not just the standard variance criteria that doesn't really apply to sign variances. And you know, maybe we ought to have some different standards when we're reviewing sign variances. And I've looked in the new Title 21, and there's nothing in there that deals with that. And I don't know if you know, that's anything that's been discussed lately, you know, within municipal staff. But it's an area I know we struggle with. We try to make those 6 standards fit to sign variances, and they really don't. And I believe a modification of those standards might be appropriate for sign variances.
Mr. Sawhill, you started out saying that someone has asked that those sign variances, the standards, be looked at?
When I first came on the commission and we got our first sign variance, and we were looking at the 6 standards as judging those against, I believe one of the staff members told me that there's been discussion of trying to develop specific standards for sign variances.
And those that are in there are those specific standards. I wrote those. There's some deviation from the 6 standards that zoning usually deals with, but in researching those, I looked around the country at sign variance standards to see what they had written, and then I modified ours to match pretty much what was going on in the rest of the ordinances that I saw dealing with sign variances, and also looking at the ones that we had, and so I think there's one additional one than what there normally is, but that's how that evolved, was looking at sign variances around the country to see what standards that they were utilizing, and then looking at our own and balancing the two. But really, pretty much what's there is in common usage throughout the country.
You know, I think the additional criteria that you identify that we should evaluate, I think, are good. But I'm not sure that the standard sticks criteria for dimensional variances apply to sign variances.
Oh, that's normally, even it could be a different board even in the UDC.
Yeah. And so I think trying to take those 6 criteria and cramming them into UDC for sign variances doesn't fit.
Well, I mean, there's some question if even UDC is the proper board to be doing sign variances. Variances all go to ZEBA, you all probably know. And the history of this, how it ended up with UDC, is that at some point somebody thought if, you know, there was discussion around if some because there's some part of the code that says that you can add extra dimensional space to a sign if it's aesthetically pleasing or matches the building or some such thing. And they thought, would ZEBA be the appropriate board to make that decision? And maybe it should be a board that has more design background and was in a better position to make those judgments. And so that's how I kind of ended up with UDC. But really now, and we've had this discussion, the staff, that if it's dimensional variances, those shouldn't even come to UDC. Those should go to ZEBA. If there is a question of architectural, some sort of flourish to the sign, then yes, those should maybe better judged by UDC. But the way it's fallen down is that all of them come to UDC, and really all of them should not.
Thank you. Did you have any additional comments for us tonight?
Yes, there were a couple of things I wanted to say. One is at the beginning of the meeting when we were going over the conflicts of interest, Tom has said that he had a conflict because his wife is an employee of Dow. And for tonight, for the first time, I mean, Tom has said that many times previously, and always it's been, you know, he wasn't usually allowed to participate because, you know, he has his wife and therefore he has a conflict of interest. And for tonight, for some reason tonight, an exception was made to that. And I just wanted to point out to the commission that if any of you have a close relationship, like a spouse or an immediate family member that works for a company that's making a presentation, that's an automatic conflict of interest. I mean, the code says even an appearance of conflict. So I think that shouldn't have happened tonight. I mean, he clearly has a conflict of interest. And the second thing, over resolutions, there was a lot of discussion about, you know, if you were here on the board, I think Mr. Dinwiddie was making that, that's, I mean, Jill can explain the policy regarding that, but it's simply pretty much just a housekeeping issue, these resolutions. I mean, sometimes you'll get resolutions and a lot of you weren't even on the board at that time. So that was another thing to be careful of. And Jill, if you want to step in.
When you have a smaller board and turnover in board members, if you weren't on the board when those resolutions came through, and because of that issue, you can go ahead and vote on the resolution. If you were conflicted out before, it is acceptable not to be conflicted out of the resolution, but just to disclose that you were conflicted out
at the time, yeah.
And will abstain from voting on that one particular issue because you were conflicted out prior. So I can redistribute that for some of the members if they'd like to refresh their memory. I can bring extra copies of that or email it to y'all. It's okay.
And one other thing, what would you like to do about this moose fencing issue? I mean, we could have the Parks Department come in and tell us, how they've been handling it, working with, picking up the maintenance of that once the one-year contractor's warranty has ended. I have no idea what they've been doing, if anything. I don't know if the contractor's taking it down at the end or leaving it up or really what's going on with it, but maybe it's something we need to address.
I guess having the Parks Department come in and explain to us what they're doing and what they would like to do and what they're capable of doing
right.
Would be good. It would be good information to get so we can maybe provide at least our desires known to the right people. And the other side of it is if we do want the moose fencing left in place to be taken over by Parks and Rec, the PM&E is going to have to change their specifications and how they
and say
acquire.
After the one-year contract period is up, contractor period,
right.
Parks
moose
Department will
be left in place.
Yeah.
And Parks Department will take over maintenance. But
right.
But at the same time, if they're not going to take over maintenance, I don't think we want to leave it there.
Right, and I have a feeling, given their budget woes, they may not be able to do it. So it's an open-ended question.
Well, I think that's the trick. If our expert testimony says that it really isn't very effective unless it's there for 3 or 4 years, whatever the establishment
3 to 5
period
years,
is.
yeah.
I guess the key is what that presentation is from the Parks Department. If they have data that shows that in all of our interest here is to protect the public good, and if we're spending tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on landscaping that dies within a year or 2 or 3, there's a price tag that you can put on that. There's a price tag on the maintenance and the cost of the fence, and we can just sort of figure out what the best course of action is. You don't hesitate at all recommending on every one of these cases that the petitioner supply a landscape maintenance plan. It would, what I object to is throwing something new on a petitioner who has no expectation of this new requirement. If we can somehow institutionalize, if we find out, if we've got study and data to back it up, that we're spending money unwisely on trees that get eaten by moose, and that for pennies on the dollar we can provide moose protection fencing and realize more of our investment in landscaping, then I think we need to move towards making that a standard that all petitioners respect for the good of the community. But we don't have the data right now. We've got a lot of anecdotal kind of information about what has worked and what we've done in the past, and it isn't consistently applied. But I'd like to see what our losses are due to non-protecting this landscaping and make some decisions based on that. So I think, yeah, a good first step is to get that information presented to us so then we have the tools to start making some recommendations that become policy.
Mm-hmm. What's been kind of bandied about to try and solve this problem, knowing that Parks Department's budget is, a pittance, is to ask Parks, PM&E to put that sort of maintenance money into a kitty for each project that then can be, taken over by the Parks Department for maintenance purposes. I don't know where that discussion went, but it's just something to consider. And when it comes to the fencing, it involves more than just at the end of 3 to 5 years taking down the fence. I mean, someone has to go and check the fence because sometimes some of the fences fall over. They also have to be taken and expanded as the tree grows. I mean, there is quite a lot of maintenance and work and upkeep to the fencing that's needed to make it really effective. So that's also something to think about. It's more than just coming along and taking it all down.
Yeah, a year ago I was driving down Muldoon Road, and there was one of the drivers of those little articulated snow blowers on the trail was cursing because he had sucked a bunch of that fence around his rotor. So assuming that he's able to get all of that fencing out of that very expensive piece of equipment, is he then obligated to replace all of the fencing that was taken down as a result of that?
So I guess to start is to contact Parks and see what, if anything, they've been doing.
I think that'd be great. Maybe we can.
They may not even know they've been charged with this responsibility. I mean, truly.
Whoever the responsible party is, they can provide that data as what the losses are. I don't even know if they have a database of that kind of thing.
Well, they've just started, keeping track. And in fact, that's one other thing to talk about is Scott Stringer, the municipal arborist, they've just completed this forestry plan, and so he may have some data, or they have the means now to collect and store that data with this new plan. So they have GPS units, and as they cruise and look at the trees, they can put into their system, the condition of the tree and what it needs and blah, 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 if the fence has fallen down or whatever. So, and I had talked to Scott a week ago and asked if he would be willing to come and give a talk to the UDC on this new plan, and he said, yeah, he would. So maybe I'll schedule that in the near future.
Not to beat or belabor an old issue, but I really am getting sensitive to the presentation was made tonight for APU. The idea that it's a slam dunk, it's a no-brainer, there's no reason to bring it in for 2 reviews. And some of the petitioners had some very good ideas about landscape walls, green walls, other alternatives to what they had designed that really don't have much of a chance of implementation when they bring in 95% complete plans.
Yeah.
If, it would really be helpful if we are asked, if it doesn't just show up on the agenda as final approval, but there is a few key bullet points that says that planning has observed this, there's been a meeting with Jerry Weaver, they've seen that this is, continued development on a previously developed site, and that it's an addition, and therefore the parameters of clearing have already been established, whatever, that, and therefore we're recommending this for final approval. But without that, I just feel like we're subject to
Right.
favoritism, depending on the petitioner.
Right, and being that was Francis's case, the APU, I didn't review it, and I didn't know that they were asking for final approval. Some of you have been on the board longer, such as James, and I think Doug was on it at the time when Blaise Burkhart was chair, and we had, a lot of discussions at that time, and the thought then with the UDC was that, the petitioner could make that request, but it would be up to the UDC to decide when they were reviewing that case whether or not they had sufficient information in that packet to make it a final approval. And if they thought they didn't have enough information presented, then they would say, no, sorry, this will be a review and you'll have to come back for a final review. And I thought, that might have been mentioned tonight, that that's sort of been the practice of the UDC in the past.
Well, perhaps as a policy matter, just as you spell out when something is in compliance with the comp plan or something like that, you could spell out when you state your conditions that this is a special condition and that the commission has the ability to accept or reject that
Right.
part of the proposal.
Right. And Francis didn't say that in his write-up? I didn't read the...
No, it was sort of a slam dunk. We assume this is a simple, straightforward project. It's not
Okay.
going to alter much from schematic to final.
Yeah.
So therefore, we've put it here for final.
Yeah, I think Francis was surprised. He didn't know that Tim was coming tonight. He had no idea.
Well, I guess, the extra sensitivity is, do all petitioners know that this is available? Because it's a dowel thing every time.
Right, and it is, and they push the envelope every time.
Right. And so if somebody gets to play by these rules, everybody should be able to play by these rules.
Yeah.
And that's my concern, is that it appears as though Dowell's projects have the ability to get one approval when other people's projects have to go through two.
Then it's up to, the UDC has the authority to say, we appreciate your request for final, but we'd like you to follow the approved process, which is review and final. Or if you think it's suited to go for final, if you have all the information you need and it looks like it's a slam dunk project, and then go ahead and do it for final.
But I just want that to be clear
We would
to
like
all
to
the
have us
petitioners.
make that.
So we don't have to say, we want you to do 2 reviews, because we're overly regulatory and onerous in our
No, it's not at
application.
all. That is the process. It is a 2-step process, and all the petitioners know that. And if you feel they're getting out of line, then
But again, it feels like punishment at that point, as opposed to finding a way to streamline the process, which I think is how this all started. If we could find a way to streamline the process and offer that streamlined path to everybody, then it doesn't feel so much like a penalty when we ask for 2 reviews.
I think you just simply need to say to the petitioner that, I'm sure as you're well aware, the UDC is a 2-step process, and, we see no reason to deviate from that 2-step process.
Okay.
But I will take it back, yes.
It just puts us in the position of being the bad guy.
They say...
And if you put that
but,
instruction
say it.
on those
It's not
conditions...
bad guy. It's not a bad guy because this is the approved process. This is the process. If they want to deviate, they're asking for something extra. They're asking to deviate from the established process. So you're certainly within your rights to say, look, you can ask, but, we want you to follow the established process, which is 2 steps. And that's not being bad guy. That's simply following the approved process. They were asking you all to make an exception for them tonight. But I understand
Okay.
your point.
It wasn't presented as an exception. It was put on the proposal, it was put on the agenda as final landscape review.
Francis had done that. Sorry, I didn't realize that Francis had put it in there as final.
Right.
Then,
So it
yeah,
didn't, to a less experienced
yeah,
member, it wouldn't look like they're getting special treatment or that it
right.
was an
I
exception.
see, because he had already put it at that. Yes. Yes, it's, I mean, again, UDC has the authority. If they don't think they have enough information or don't feel comfortable giving it final approval, then go ahead and say that. You're not a bad guy. You're not, don't word, I mean, just state your reasons for doing that. That's all you have to do is state good reasons for doing that, and then go ahead and do it. But I will bring it up, and I will talk to Francis about it. But I think Francis is, he doesn't have a background in any sort of design, so when he reads evaluates a site plan, it's a little more difficult for him because it's kind of out of his area of expertise. So what may have been looked to him as a slam dunk, it's where some of you with design backgrounds can see that, no, there are really many more issues to it than he was able to see.
Anything else for us, Sharon?
So, I mean, the UDC kind of acts as a backstop to the planner's review. When I do my reviews, I hope I catch everything, but I may not. And so I look to the UDC to find things that I missed, I didn't see, and I look to you as that, another set of eyes reviewing the plans to catch and comment on what I don't see, so that then in the end we end up with the best possible project, we can get. And so if you see something that either Francis has written or I've written, go ahead and say that. And if you're not comfortable with it being a final approval, say that.
I'll be the bad guy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're perfectly comfortable being the bad guy. I realize that there is a lot of time and money associated with a two-step process. And I would just as soon do away with time and money if it's at all possible.
Right.
To help these guys, help us develop this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And there was, when UDC first was established years ago, it was a one-step process. But then problems surfaced where they were seeing the project too late in the process to really affect any change without making it really expensive in terms of design fees, because the designers would then have to go back and make these changes, and it just loaded up a lot of money for the petitioners. So that's why we went to the two-step process. So hopefully we could save money on the petitioner's side by seeing these issues earlier in the process when they could still be corrected.
The horse is dead.
Did I beat it over the head enough?
Yeah, it's falling over.
Oh, one thing before I forget about the vacancy. There has been a person put forward. They were introduced to the assembly last Tuesday, and there's a 10-day waiting period, and so if all goes well, they should be appointed at the end of the month. And if they go in and get all signed up, they should be at the May meeting.
What's the background of the...
It's a business owner with a background in utility tariffs, utilization, financial, utility tariffs. Nothing that's going to be useful to the UDC, frankly.
Citizen, yeah.
Yeah, a citizen at large. Yeah.
Then we're still too short?
Yes, we're still too short.
Any rumor?
No word about that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to contact the mayor's office and
I will. I'll inquire, see what.
And if you could put in a word to, have someone that actually has a background in what the UDC is charged with doing.
We need a landscape architect.
Like
Yeah,
Mark
we have
Zimmer?
no landscape architect. I mean, the only design professional we have here is James, and his term is up in October. I mean, we have, frankly, I hate to say this, but this new guy who's coming on, I doubt he can even read a plan.
What was up with Mark? Was that just was simply a paperwork thing?
No, it wasn't a paperwork thing. It was, I don't know, you'd have to,
Conscious decision on the mayor's part not to read.
yeah, it's a decision on the mayor's part.
We appreciate your input.
I mean, Jim, if you tell them, emphasize, there are some boards and commissions where you can have a lot of at-large people, but this one is,
No, we need people.
you really can't. I mean, we need an engineer,
Yeah,
we need another engineer, we need at least 2 landscape architects.
Yeah, we need our arborist replaced.
Yeah, we need, and I sent resumes of someone to replace Patricia, who had a background in, plant health and horticulture, and it's just shunted to the side. So I've sent, resumes of people who are willing to serve and who have a background in this, and they're not being considered.
Would you mind forwarding those resumes to me?
Yes, I'll try and dig those up.
Okay, appreciate it. And I guess I would encourage any other board members, if you're aware of people that might be good candidates to join us on the board, if you could make some calls and see if we can recruit some qualified people, I think that would be a good thing. I think we need to find another, in the distant future, we need to find another architect to join us once James' term's out. And, go from there. Okay. Anything else? Anyone? I get a motion to adjourn? So moved. And seconded, and we're out of here.